Hello and welcome to the Celtic State of Mind Thursday Bulletin. It's someone different hosting for once. Paul is taking a much deserved break. He's on a holiday with his family. So I've been tasked with taking over the bulletin for the next few weeks, and I'm joined by JP Mason. We've got a lot to discuss. Brendan Rodgers looks like he's going to be coming in. That's happened since you were last on the show. The candidates, a lot of them have come forward. Some have fallen to the wayside. But Enzo Maresca's seemingly heading off to Leicester City. That seems like it's a done deal. So that just leaves Brendan Rodgers becoming highest paid manager in the club's history. What's your thoughts on what's happened with Brendan since you were last on the show?
It feels like we're in some sort of Kevin Graham parallel universe where we're discussing this. I'm a wee bit reluctant still to completely go all in on this happening, given that 2 years ago, prior to you being on this podcast, Paul and I and the others would sit and debate over who was going to be the manager, and Eddie Howe was the guy that was going to come in, and everyone was getting really excited about that, only for it to not happen at the last minute. And then we had our big wait. Sorry, we didn't have a big wait. We didn't have a big wait at all. We had a couple of days, and then Ange was in. So I am reluctant. But last week I was on, that was prior to the Stephen McGowan article and all of the reportings of people flying here, people flying there. Dermot Desmond coming to Glasgow, Dermot Desmond going to London. All this has been reported, and you just, I don't know if the Howe thing has damaged me, but I haven't seen any visual evidence of this, so I'm just taking people's word for it that it's happening. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but I have to be honest and say I would be shocked if it didn't happen now. Given the level of media hype around it, and you'd think somebody within Celtic would have poured cold water over this if it genuinely wasn't happening. So I did say to Paul last week that if it was to happen, I would see it as Brendan Rodgers making amends for the way that he left. And when I say that, I mean that obviously everybody knows the way that he left, and it didn't sit well with me at the time. I just felt sad that he'd kind of tarnished his legacy at Celtic, because there's people that are still throwing stones at Ange for leaving the way that he did, and calling him an egotistical liar and things like that. I absolutely don't subscribe to that at all. I think man comes in to unsuccessful club, man does amazing job, does exactly what he said he wanted to do, man leaves, job done, 5 out of 6 trophies. I really don't think, if you're actually going to take it beyond that and keep having a go at him beyond that, then I think you need to find something better to do with your life than to expend energy on that scenario. So with the Brendan Rodgers thing, I genuinely didn't think he would ever come back. I thought, much the same as when a player that goes on to a higher level, like, do I think Kieran Tierney will ever be back at Celtic? Probably not. I'd like to think he might be, just with the nostalgic person in me, but Kieran Tierney went to one of the big clubs in England and is earning far, far more money than he'd ever get at Celtic. Just the same way as things like, Moussa Dembele or other players, Jeremy Frimpong. Do I think Jeremy Frimpong will come back to Celtic? No. So Brendan Rodgers, the idea of Brendan Rodgers coming back to somewhere where he's kind of already been successful, I didn't think it would happen. I thought we were kind of part of his history, and it would be a manager that we would never be able to get again because of his stature in the game now. I mean, he's an established Premiership manager. Regardless of the way it ended at Leicester, you cannot deny he's been a success there. The final placings that he's got for Leicester, the FA Cup, and semi-final of the Conference League, that might be scoffed at by some, but it's still an achievement that he can put on his CV. So the fact that we're getting a manager that I thought would be unattainable, and the fact that he's willing to come, that to me actually is a bit of an olive branch, so to speak. I never was in the sort of he's a rat or he's this or that camp. I found it quite a stretch to push that far to call him some heinous name. And obviously there's been a lot of revisionism yesterday, videos of a pub somewhere of Celtic fans singing a horrible song about him. That didn't speak for the entire support, just the same way as if Celtic fans somewhere sing a song about an ex-Rangers player or something like that, that doesn't speak for me. So that song that was sang in that pub doesn't speak for me. It doesn't speak for the Celtic support. It was never sang at a ground en masse. It was never sang at Celtic Park. So if you want to use that as a stick to beat us with, then, you know, knock yourself out. But Brendan Rodgers coming back, I've made my peace with it, and he's a top manager. He's coming into a situation potentially where he's got far more tools to play with than he did the first time. The majority of what Brendan Rodgers did the first time round was making better use of the players that were already there and improving them. We were just talking before we came on air about his signing policy. His signing policy, I might add, the club's signing policy.
Yeah,
and his
massive quotations.
Yeah, in his time. So I think, and I've seen evidence in the last 2 years of that policy having changed, given who we've signed and what we've paid out for the signings that we've made. So I think it's a different kettle of fish this time, and time will tell. I mean, it could be hours, it could be days before we get an announcement, but it's certainly an exciting time to be a Celtic fan, as it always is.
Yeah, well, out of all the candidates that were linked, you've got to think, as far as managerial quality goes, Brendan Rodgers was the best there was that was sort of a likely candidate for Celtic. The issues really come from his relationship with the fans. It's going to take some reporting, and if Stephen McGowan's reports are to be believed, that's part of the big reason Brendan Rodgers has come back. As someone who was a Celtic fan all of his life, he's said Celtic's his favourite team. He would want to restore the relationship with the fans because the fans felt betrayed. You've just got to look at the banner that we held up at Tynecastle after Rodgers left. Never a Celt, always a fraud. He left for mediocrity. So it was a loss of trust in the Celtic board for me, led to my understanding as to why Rodgers left. As time has passed, we saw how the Celtic board can be with the fans, especially during that 10-in-a-row attempted season. The fans' relationship with the board was strained. It fell out, and that was why I sort of realised why Brendan left. So how does Rodgers go about getting the fans on track? Because it's going to be an uphill battle no matter how good a manager you are if you've not got the backing from the fans. That's part of the reason Ange succeeded, was because he won over the fans so early. It was signings and perhaps some promising football in the park that really convinced the fans that this guy might be right for the job. But it's different for Brendan Rodgers. He's proven quality. We know how good a manager he is. It's more of winning over the fans' trust rather than trying to show us how good he actually is. How do you think he does that? Do you think it's winning games? Do you think it's an apology? How does Brendan go about getting the fans back on side?
For me personally, and again, I have to kind of back this up by saying, like, anytime that you or I or anybody speaks on this podcast, I'm not trying to claim that I'm speaking for anyone other than me. I'm just giving my opinion. It's just the same way that Paul was giving his opinion on Sky Sports yesterday. I got in a bit of a wormhole in some of the comments that were underneath, and there was a lot of positivity, which was great to see, because ultimately Paul's a Celtic fan. There's no denying that. And he runs this podcast and was asked to go on Sky Sports. He didn't go with a begging bowl to Luke Shanley or anybody else at Sky Sports saying, "Oh, please, sir, can you have me on your channel?" They've obviously gone to him and said, "We'd like you to speak on the channel to express your thoughts." And he's done that in a cohesive and very articulate manner, as he always does. And I've known the guy for 6 years. I don't get this like vitriol that gets fired at him. And obviously people were slagging him for wearing a jacket in 28 degrees heat. I mean, that's allowed because it was absolutely boiling yesterday. I don't know what that was all about, but Hopefully he's not taking that jacket on holiday with him, because he certainly wouldn't need it where he's going. But just going back to my opinion on Brendan Rodgers, it's my personal opinion that him coming back is an olive branch. Him coming back just in itself is an olive branch, because I don't know. I just think some people will look at it as a kind of backward step in his career, whereas he'll be looking at it as an opportunity, I think, an exciting opportunity to get back to a club that's in a different place than it was, 7 years ago when he came in. There's a different challenge now. Of course, he's up against the European football mastermind that is Michael Beale, with all the success that he has behind him, numerous trophies and league championships and everything else. So he's obviously got that to go up against, and I think he'll probably fancy a bit of that. I think it's just the fact that he's getting to come to a club at an exciting point in its history. There's no booby trap kind of qualifiers to negotiate. He's straight into the Champions League, and it allows him a lot more time to plan for that. And he's got a really good squad to play with as well. So with regards to getting the fans back on side, maybe for some they will want an apology. Whether they get that in black and white on the day that he's announced or whatever, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how he handles the media. But one thing's for sure, he's pretty good at handling the media, which is why he's been a good manager. He's always, maybe he's been a bit too honest, as he was in the latter part of his time, the first time when he was coming away with the barbs about the signings that were coming in and needing a million wingers or not needing a million wingers, and other things like that. So I always enjoyed his press conferences up here. I thought he was sharp. And the other thing is Ange has been such a big, Ange Postecoglou, should I say? I'm not on first name terms with him.
It's not a first name basis anymore. He's good.
Yeah. I never met the man. So Ange Postecoglou was such a big character here that someone coming in to replace him has to be big as well. It couldn't be, in my eyes, an Enzo Maresca or even a Jesse Marsch. I know Jesse Marsch is quite a travelled coach so far, and even in his relative youth. But it had to be some, like, I really don't think that it could have been anybody other than someone like Brendan Rodgers, because and again, I'm hesitant to say that it is him, because we don't know. We still don't know. We're just going by media reports here. But the way that I'm looking at it right now is that it has to be someone huge to come in as a personality, and as well as the experiences, because Ange Postecoglou put his footprint all over this football club, and we're currently still kind of coming to terms with the fact that he's no longer the manager. I've made my peace with the fact that he's gone to a club that he couldn't turn down. I still was having conversations with people yesterday where they're going, "Oh, I thought I should have stayed for another season." I'm like, seriously, you genuinely think he should have turned Spurs down in the Premier League at 57 years old to stay with Celtic to maybe play European football until December? I don't get the logic in that at all. I mean, you can talk about, I suppose they love the club and everything else. I'm like, aye, but come on, this is a job. This is a man's career. He came to Celtic and did fantastically well in the 2 years that he was here. Was absolutely ridiculed by every corner of this country, opposition fans, our fans, the media. And he was able to walk away and drop the mic in spectacular fashion, I think. Folk can home in on his European record and criticise him for that, as the poison pen of Ewan Murray did in his Guardian article. My God, that guy is bitter. Really bitter. I mean, it's quite something. I tend not to read his articles, but it's sort of like I have to read them because I just want to know what nonsense he's writing. But there you go, another guy having a go at him for his European record. I mean, his first European season, he's picking up an absolute disaster. He's got hardly any time to prepare, loses in the Champions League qualifiers, and then goes into a Europa League campaign where we were up against some decent sides, and we actually held our own, and possibly in another season we managed to get through that group, which would have been unthinkable at the start. And then in the second season, it's your first crack at the Champions League. You've got a Shakhtar Donetsk side with an £80 million player who scores 2 goals against you in each game. You've got Real Madrid and you've got Leipzig. So it's a fairly meaty challenge for any manager, never mind someone who hasn't managed in the Champions League before and who hasn't spent an absolute fortune in comparison to the other side. So I think you can't. I know maybe we shouldn't be talking about Ange Postecoglou anymore, but I still feel the need to defend him for doing what he did. And Brendan Rodgers coming in potentially is the one and only candidate that you would think would be the best one.
Yeah, it's got to be commended how Ange really turned things round. As you mentioned, he came in as a laughing stock and he left as this sort of mighty manager who's gone on to one of the sort of biggest jobs you'll get. The Premier League is like a football and Super League. The best managers want to manage there, the best players want to play there. There's lots of money on offer there as well. And he's 57, he's been well travelled, he's seen a lot. This might be the only chance he gets to get an opportunity like that, which is why I sort of understood why Ange was going to move on. You would think the only sort of hope he could have held on to that would have stayed at Celtic would have been that he likes the romanticism of football. So the love he would have got at something like Celtic could have been enough to convince him to stay. But I'm glad you mentioned the Ange's European form, because Rodgers' wasn't particularly glittering either. Celtic haven't been particularly glittering in Europe in ages, to be honest.
I was in Paris. It was anything but glittering. It was it was fairly demoralising. That 7-1 in Paris was. I mean, if I thought I didn't like clubs like Paris Saint-Germain and Manchester City and things like that, clubs bankrolled by countries, to be on the receiving end of the sheer might of a club like that, with Neymar banging in a hat-trick and doing his stupid wee dance in front of you. And
the Dembele goal almost angered them. It was almost a mistake to go 1-0 up, because they're like, oh, you want to do that, do you, in front of our fans?
It was good fun at the time. Even more. It was good fun at the time to go 1-0 up, but not in the 92nd minute when you're looking up at the scoreboard and seeing 7 against you, which I'd never seen in my life and hopefully never will see again. But obviously with Barcelona did it to us as well, also under Brendan Rodgers' tenure. But I think it's a different kettle of fish now. I think yes, we got beat 5-1 at the Bernabeu last season against Real Madrid. It was our first time playing Real Madrid for 42 years or something like that. So there was maybe a bit of being overawed by the occasion. And when you go a goal down in the Bernabeu, it's probably psychologically quite hard to think you're going to do anything at that point. And better teams than us have gone there and had a hammering. So Brendan Rodgers' European time, first season aside, obviously we got a couple of draws against Manchester City, which were great. I was at the home leg of that, and it was absolutely unbelievable. I think that at that point, I don't think Man City had conceded a goal, never mind dropped a point in the league or anything, and we were the first team to actually lay a glove on them. So that was great. And then we had Mönchengladbach as well. That was a disappointing one. We got beat at home off them. And a
big chance from Cal McGregor stands out. And
that was away. That was
trip in Gladbach as well.
Yeah, I was at that as well. That was a really, really good trip. But each European campaign is it's always it's always unique, and it is kind of the luck of the draw and how you're set up at that time. But there was so many problems behind the scenes, as we know now, at Celtic, that we were not set up well for Europe. I think it's a far different kettle of fish this time. I think we have a really good squad. We have money in the bank to strengthen. We don't have the qualifiers. We have a lot more time to plan. It's the best preparation I can think of in recent years as a Celtic fan to be going into a Champions League campaign. And that's probably one of the reasons why it is an attractive prospect to a certain Brendan Rodgers.
I think part of the reason for Celtic struggles in the Champions League in recent years, you could probably go back to the early 2010s. Being in and out of the Champions League, there's no consistency there. There's no consistently getting that Champions League money, which leads to sort of pushing on and making strides in Europe. That's why clubs like, I'm pretty sure Club Brugge got to the last 16 this season. It took about 2 or 3 years of getting hammered regularly in the Champions League group stages for them to make that progress. And if the reports from Stephen McGowan are to be believed, it looks like we're trying to make a bit more progress. Investment in players and infrastructure to push the club forward in Europe. A war chest of 30 million to spend this summer. Brendan Rodgers, part of the reason why he left Celtic was the lack of investment. You mentioned he complained about it all the time. So what can he do with £30 million? I don't think there's a complete overhaul needed of the squad. I think it's just some upgrades in a couple of first-team positions, which you could probably chuck about 8-9 million on a couple of players here and there.
I mean, again, his knowledge of the game down south will be pretty strong after having eyes on that league for the last four years or whatever. So he'll know if there's a player that's the classic case of a good Celtic signing from down south is getting somebody that's maybe lost their way a little bit. We've seen it so many times. I've seen it so many times, going way back to the likes of Chris Sutton and players like that, guys who've been written off and have a point to prove. Scott Sinclair was a very good example in his first season. So I would like to think that if there's a few of them around, that he could get his hands on them, and we're not potentially going to have to pay crazy money to get them. Although that is difficult now in the current climate, because it's just the money is insane for even average players move for exorbitant fees. So we need to be very smart to pick anybody up like that. But I think, like you said, I don't think there is a need for a massive overhaul. We're not in a 2021 rebuild situation where you've got a raft of players. Now let's be honest. There is going to be some players in that dressing room who've played the last 2 years who maybe are looking for a new challenge. I think did Ange Postecoglou even say that? Like after the Scottish Cup final, he said there's players in there that have probably played the last game for Celtic.
I'm not too sure.
I think I picked that up. Maybe I'm misquoting him, but I think there's obviously going to be a shelf life at Celtic for some of these guys that they'll want a new challenge. They'll want to test themselves in England. It always tends to happen after 2 seasons. We've spoken about that before, as being that kind of cut-off point. And if that's the case, so be it. If there is players that want to move on, as long as we actually get it done and we don't let it drag out or make false promises or try and hold them at ransom, because we know that doesn't work. It's never been a good idea in the past where you hold on to somebody longer than they want to be here, because it just leads to their value dropping, and then you could end up losing them for nothing. Like we lost Boyata for nothing. We were offered something like 9 million for him in Chams.
Yeah, that's why teams like Ajax are so successful in the transfer market, because they're so incisive with when they sell their players. They sell them at the right time. Guys like Anthony, I think they got £90 million from him from Manchester United. They know how to sell players at the right time. We've got to get things right in the transfer market. That's why the 10-in-a-row bid sort of failed. Neil Lennon said after losing to Ferencvaros, there's certain players that don't want to be here. And he went on to sell no one after that interview, which, if you've got a squad that wants away, that's not what you do.
I'll give him a little bit. I'll give him and the club a little bit of leeway, and I've said this many times on the show. COVID absolutely screwed us on that front. There is no way that was a normal time to be wheeling and dealing in the transfer market. We were getting lowball offers, I think, for players. I think we got a lowball offer for Edward that we turned away. So bit of a different kettle of fish there. If we're getting offered money for whoever it may be in that dressing room, whether it's Hatate or Matt O'Reilly or whoever, I mean, we have got a lot of assets in that squad that will get decent fees. So I guess it's more about how many people leave as to how many we need to come in. But I would hazard the guess that maybe 3 will leave in this transfer window, and I think probably Abada will be one of them. I didn't see it, but people I spoke to who were at the game said that his body language after the game at the Scottish Cup final would suggest that he's probably played his last game for Celtic. Good luck to him. When he came in, I thought, oh, here we go, another Dudu Dahan special guy that's going to come in and probably contribute very little, and then he'll go out on loan to somebody, and then that'll be him. But you cannot say he was not a successful signing for Celtic if he has indeed completed his time here, because his numbers, whilst sometimes he doesn't look like he knows what he's doing with the ball, he knows what he's doing when the ball comes to him in the box. The Dundee United last minute goal in particular was, for a young guy to have the composure to do that in the last minute in a must-win game was massive. I mean, he would probably only been about 20 at that point. So yeah, I guess the level of signings that we need to make will depend on who goes out. And I've made my peace with the fact that we're not going to hold on to players as long as we want to. I mean, everyone will be thinking that we're such a great proposition and we've got Champions League football and everything else, but being realistic about it, Champions League football can be done and dusted by December if you've not been good enough to qualify out of the group stage or indeed get into the Europa League. So it only goes so far, and the money and the level of club, whether you like it or not, is going to be bigger in England, and it's just a fact of life. It's the football food chain that we've suffered from losing our manager to, and it obviously is the exact same with players. But it's good that we're in the position that we have. We have money. We have the so-called cliched war chest to crack open to go and buy players, which obviously, of course, then leads to fingers pointing from other Scottish clubs and being like, "Oh, look, you just spend money and you've got more money than all of us put together," and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, yeah, but how have we garnered that money? We've garnered that money by clever transfers.
Yeah, that finger was pointed left, right, and centre in Ange's first season to try and put down his achievements and the scale of the rebuild he's done. Oh, he spent all of this money. It was. Then you look back from that January, you've had the sales of Jeremy Frimpong, Christopher Ayer, Ryan Christie, Odsonne Edouard, all moving on. It was money that Celtic had built up.
That's all ignored, though. Conveniently ignored, and just that doesn't suit the narrative when it comes to a poison pen letter article by a journalist or snipers online on Twitter or anything like that. We are classed in the same way as I class Manchester City or Paris Saint-Germain or anything else. Like, it's as if we're backed by some oil state or something, and we've got this infinite pool of money that we want to sign a centre half. Cool, here's 15 million, go and sign the centre half. Like, I really don't think, if you go through that Celtic team that's playing right now, I hardly think you could say that it's sort of Brewster's Millions. There's a old school reference for anyone watching. It's actually a Brewster's Millions starting 11. It's a mixture of cute, clever signings from like Maeda was 1.5 million. I mean, that's insane. Maeda 1.5 million. I mean, even Alistair Johnston, 4 million for a right back in 2023 is not a lot of money if you're Celtic. It's not breaking the bank, is it? I mean, our record transfer fee is still 9 million, and that's from 2018. And rewind back to 20 years ago, we were paying 6 million. So it's not as if we've moved on to like spending 15, 20, 25 million pounds on players and left out all the other clubs in the wake. It's just, we have a big support. We sell season tickets every season. We get revenue from TV and sponsorship. We sell a lot of football strips. We've been good at investing in players. And I mean, if Dermot Desmond, obviously the guy's a billionaire, if he wanted to really bankroll Celtic, then we would be like a Man City or a PSG and overspending. But I like the fact that we're within the FFP. We stand on our own 2 feet as a football club, and these other clubs like that are it's like cheating at Champ Manager to me. It is 100%. I watched the Champions League final on Saturday, and I honestly, genuinely believe that a little bit of football died when they lifted that trophy on Sunday. And people will be like, "Oh, you're sounding bitter, JP," and "Oh, I know you're a Man United fan and everything else." And Man United did it in the 90s. I'm sorry, Manchester United didn't do that in the 90s. Manchester United bought a couple of players in the 98-99 season that augmented a side that was already strong, that had been built on the basis of their youth system, and also built on the fact that they were competing in the Champions League regularly. It wasn't a massive oil state that allowed them to buy Jaap Stam and Dwight York. It's completely different, but ran over. Sorry.
Oh, I appreciate everyone who's been tuning in so far this first half now. I've got Colin Jordan coming in here. Kyogo's just scored for Japan.
Amazing.
So we'll see what Moriyasu thinks of that one. He's been leaving him out of the squad consistently. We saw how heartbreaking the World Cup was for Kyogo, and I don't know if you've seen his documentary that he put out. I think it was a few months ago. It seemed that it really affected him, but you wouldn't think that from watching his game. And if rumours are to be believed, I think Ange might want to take him to Spurs with him. And he has previous for taking players with him. If you look at Daisen Maeda and Tomoki Iwata, they both came from the Yokohama Marinos, but on the other hand, he didn't take any coaches with him from Yokohama to Celtic. And the rumours are that John Kennedy and Gavin Strachan are both wanted by Ange Postecoglou. Rio Hatate also linked with Spurs. Daisen Maeda getting linked with Brighton and Southampton. There's a lot of these Japanese players that Ange has brought over, the player that he knows the best. They look like they're getting linked away. Does Ange leaving, do you think that spells an end to Celtic's Japanese connection, or do you think with Mark Law being there, we're still going to stick around in that market? We've even got the pre-season tour as well of Japan and South Korea. Do you think the interest will stay in that market?
I would think it would be insane to just close the door on it, because the manager that we brought from that country has left us. I mean, it would be, if we don't continue to have eyes on that league, then they're doing us a disservice as running our club, because we would expect players to be signed from anywhere in the world if they're good enough to play for Celtic. And the guys that came in from Japan have more than proved, well, most of them anyway. I mean, I don't think you could really give Hidiguchi a gold star, but he was just unfortunate with injury and was up against a really, really strong midfield. So, but the rest, I mean, Maeda has been absolutely unbelievable. I had a feeling when he came in that January that he would prove to be a great signing, and I'll say it again, I've said it a couple of times in the show, but it was a European game. I think it was a Bodo Glimt game, and the guy next to me, not the usual guy that sits next to me at Celtic Park, he was just in that seat for that game, but he was just like, that guy's a fraud. I would like to know that guy's opinion on Maeda now, after the last 18 months or whatever, because if he still thinks Maeda's a fraud, then we're watching a different game, because whilst he might not be Messi with his skills or anything like that, his work rate is unbelievable, and he is actually the one player that if I was going to say that Ange Postecoglou would come back for anybody at Celtic, it would be him, given his youth. I think he's maybe 25 now, and his work rate. If you put somebody like Maeda in that Tottenham squad, he might not start every week, but to have him there as a weapon to come on and help you out, I would be. I'm not trying to will him away. I want Maeda to stay. Of course I do. I want all the players to stay. But if you're asking me about Ange Postecoglou coming back for anybody, it would be him. I don't think the Kyogo thing, time will tell, I might be wrong, but I don't think the Kyogo thing has got legs. I just don't see him shopping in our market for a player for Spurs. It would be astonishing to me if Kyogo signed for Spurs. That would be it would be a move that would certainly change the course of how things go from now on in terms of players. You know, when sometimes when a player goes for a fee from Scotland and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that's the going rate. You know, like, for example, Bassey going to Ajax or Tierney going to Arsenal or something like that. It's almost like, well, if you do this at this level in Scotland, then you're this price.
That's
and
how
you
much
can
you get,
Yeah. If Kyogo went to Spurs, then that's an absolute game changer for our league as a whole, I think, because suddenly you have to sort of take note of what someone does in the Scottish League, because he hasn't really done it in Europe. He's got a couple of goals, but you would be basing that fee and that transfer on what he's done in Scotland. So I think it would have a massive effect on clubs going forward, and that's why I think it won't happen, because I just don't. I think it's too big.
I think the fee was a bit crazy. I don't think a team would come in and pay us £25 million for Kyogo. Not a chance. I don't think we'd get more for Kyogo than we did for Odds and Edward. I think Edward had the age on his side.
Of course,
and he had the year left on his deal, so that might have cut it down a bit. But 25 million was if he would have been looking at for someone like Odds and Edward. But when you mentioned Daiz Maeda, one of the things I was worried about with Ange moving on and a new manager coming in was how would a lot of these players react or sort of fare with a new manager. Ange's style, it's so unique, it's so specific that you would need a bit of continuity. You need a manager that's going to play sort of a really free-flowing, attacking, fast-paced style of football. That's why I think someone like David Moyes wouldn't have worked. That pragmatic style would have been sort of too far strayed from the football that Ange Postecoglou played. But Maeda was so specific. He was such a key sort of cog to Ange's style of football. I don't know how he would work under Brendan Rodgers' style of football. The same with someone like Greg Taylor. Greg Taylor completely revitalised his Celtic career playing that inverted fullback role because he completely bought into Ange's philosophy. So with Greg Taylor playing football, trying to hit the byline again, I don't really know how well that'll work for Taylor. Do you see anything like that for yourself with Rodgers coming in? Do you think there's any players who might not, who would see a positive effect of Rodgers coming in, or there's anyone who would see a negative effect with Rodgers coming in?
I think, first of all, before you get to talking about how he's going to play football, I think it's more about whether or not they get on well with him as a person, as a human being, and how he enters that dressing room for the first time. Again, if it is him, it's really unnerving to be speaking about something that's going to happen that hasn't happened yet. I'm very, very conscious that that's not the case. But should he walk into that dressing room, I think it's about how the players react to him as a person first and foremost. But there's certainly enough evidence to suggest that he does have a good rapport with players. He's developed players. He developed players at Celtic. He's developed players at Leicester. he apparently wanted to take Callum McGregor to Leicester, which obviously wouldn't have gone down well at all, given his the way that he left. If Callum McGregor had followed him out the door, but hopefully that relationship is still strong. And yeah, with regards to the actual playing style, you'd like to think that maybe there could be a kind of hybrid of what Ange Postecoglou was doing, and what Brendan Rodgers can do. The guy's a successful coach. He's come into sides before where there's been a manager there beforehand. I mean, he took over a Leicester team that had won the league, which was the biggest achievement that they'll ever do. I mean, I'm not saying that the entire team was still there, but it was a good amount of them were still there. So they'd obviously had that success with Ranieri, and he had to pick them up again and go again with them and augment that with his own signings. So obviously it's a far different situation coming into Celtic after the back of what's happened in the last 2 years, where you have seen a support that's I've rarely felt a support being as united. Obviously, online's different. There's obviously people still willing to have arguments with you about this, that, and whatever. But being at the games and feeling the atmosphere at the stadium and or stadiums, should I say, I've never ever felt as much goodwill. I mean, I said it a couple of weeks ago, but the roar when Postecoglou came and took the applause from the fans after we beat Rangers in the semi-final was like nothing I've heard. It was like someone turning it up to 11. There's another old school film reference for anyone watching. And I hadn't felt like that. You could feel a marked difference with what's gone before, and so that's a challenge in itself to maintain that, or certainly to retrieve it from what it was before. Because when things were good under Brendan Rodgers a few years ago, they were really good. We were flying at times, and some of the things that we did, 5-1 at Ibrox in particular, is a memory that I'm very glad to have in my mind, because prior to that I had a lot of bad memories there growing up as a wee guy, seen as being beaten there on too many occasions that I'd care to remember, and so to go there and absolutely do them in their own ground and watch them leave in droves as we celebrated was quite special. And the 3-2 game against, when he brought Edouard on and we got a man sent off, and you're like, wait a minute, he's bringing a striker on. What's this chaos?
It was bold, it was brave from Brendan Rodgers, but that's what made him so successful at Celtic. He embodied a lot of the characteristics that the fans really bought into, in the same way that Ange was successful at Celtic. You've got to have, as you mentioned earlier in the show, you've got to have a bit about you to be Celtic manager. If you're going to come in and look a bit like a pushover, then you will be pushed over. It's as simple as that. But a lot of the worry about Brendan coming in, as you mentioned, Ange left a positive atmosphere, left the club in a healthy state, perhaps the healthiest it's been since Brendan Rodgers left Celtic and Neil Lennon took over. So it remains to be seen how Rodgers will sort of take over from that. But I don't doubt that he can have a positive effect on some of our players. You've just got to look at what he did when he first came to the club. Guys like Callum McGregor, Stuart Armstrong, you know the Stuart Armstrong song. Scott Brown was a player I was going to mention. He completely revitalised some of their careers. Stuart Armstrong moved on to the Premier League, playing really well there. But the players at the club that I think could get a boost from Brendan Rodgers coming in, one of them I think, it was mentioned in the comments already, it was by Corvo NUFC. I think O will get a very big boost from Brendan Rodgers coming in. He seems to have similar, he's a big player, a lot of strength about him, but he's got the similar technical qualities to what Moussa Dembele had. Not a complete powerhouse, but very good in the ball. Perhaps more like an Edouard if you're looking at Rodgers strikers. I think O could get a really big boost. What have you made of him since January? Do you think that he could have a big season next year?
I see a guy that obviously I've not seen too much of him, as none of us have really. I don't think anybody could really make a proper judgment on him, although some people have made a similar judgment on Kobayashi as a centre half based on his appearances so far. But I think with I just see somebody that looks like he's really, really determined to do well for us. He always just looks like if he misses a chance, he looks annoyed. When he comes on, when he's got an opportunity to come on as a sub, you can tell straight away he wants to be involved in the game and wants to have an impact. And that's all you can really ask from a player, especially somebody at that age. Because sometimes players at that age kind of think they're it, and they've already made it. And I see a guy in him that looks like he knows he's got levels to improve, and we're a pretty good club to be able to do that with. And like you said, Brendan Rodgers could get something out, get more out of him than another manager that would come in. So he was obviously being signed with a lot of potential. He is an international, right? He's played for the international side.
Yeah, he was. I think he was in the squad at the World Cup. Actually,
yeah,
he was third choice striker, but he was in the squad.
Yeah, so he's knocking on the door international level, and I know that did Ange Postecoglou not say that it took quite a bit to actually get him here in the first place, because there was a lot of sort of negotiating to be done to get him.
He still had a game to play with Suwon over in South Korea, and there was a lot of rumours with, I don't know if you remember the name, Cho Gu-sung. He was the main player who was linked. He got a hat-trick at that World Cup. So, if he was the second choice striker for us, he's done a really good job. You'd think he was our first choice the way he came in. I'm not too sure if he's of the quality that Giakoumakis was at Celtic. I don't think you've replaced him, but with the potential he has down the line, he could definitely be better than Joris Giakoumakis.
He's got 7 years to do that. So he's got 7 years in Giakoumakis. And I think a lot of everyone's sort of getting ahead of themselves with the fact that Giakoumakis has scored or become the fastest player to get to 10 goals in the MLS. I'm happy for him. I loved him at Celtic. I thought he was great. I don't think that then should have us all kind of being upset about the fact that he's doing well out there and like how he could have still been with us.
Yeah, he wanted to leave. He wanted to leave.
He wanted to leave, and he's probably having a really good time living in the States and playing. And I what's the word I'm trying to think of? I naively said that I didn't know what sort of crowds or stadium he would be playing to. And then you look at the clips of what he's playing in front of. It's really well attended games, and you can't really decry that. You have to be mindful of the fact that it's not the best league in the world. It's not anywhere close to being that. But ultimately, he'll be earning good money. He's obviously having a good time and he's scoring goals. But I'm certainly not sitting here wondering what if about Giakoumakis.
Kyogo's just finished top scorer and swept all the Player of the Year awards. I don't think I'm thinking about what if with Joris Giakoumakis. I want to stay on the topic of transfers, though. There's a player getting linked with Celtics, apparently really close to agreeing a deal, actually. Odin Thiago Holm from Vålerenga in Norway. 2.6 million is the reported fee. The central midfielder seems a bit more like a 6 from some of the scout reports I've been reading, a bit like Cal McGregor in the way he receives the ball from the centre-backs and progresses the play forward. But there's a couple of eyebrows being raised here. You're making a signing without a manager, first of all, so who's picked him out? Is he from Ange's shortlist? Do you think it's a Mark Lawwell signing?
That's a concern, I have to say. I've always been wary, and we spoke about this a lot in the first, 6 months to a year that I was on here with Paul and stuff. And you always are wary of who is actually making the signings, because we don't know who was making the signings at that point in time with Brendan Rodgers. The same with Neil Lennon, the Neil Lennon signings that came in, guys like Barkas, Ayeti, Laxalt, Duffy. Sorry if I'm giving anybody PTSD here over that season, but I just the main person that should be having a say on signings is the manager, and currently we don't have one, so that's always a concern. I just you like all the dots to be joined up, and it's felt like that has been happening for the last 2 years. It felt like everybody's had a role and everybody's performed well in it, whether that's Gavin Strachan, whether it's John Kennedy, whether it's a physio, whoever, the players, they've all contributed. Like the way that the culture was under Ange Postecoglou made it feel like there wasn't guys sulking on the sidelines. There was guys there ready to contribute, and whoever was pushing the button on transfers was doing it on the say-so of Ange Postecoglou. There's no two ways about it. I could not ever foresee if Ange Postecoglou was to pop up on a screen below us right now and we were to say who signed the players when you were there, and if he said anything other than him, under oath, I would be shocked, because it just felt like he was the man running that side of things. So I don't know anything about this player. I've never heard of him. I'm not saying that no way does that mean that he's not going to be a good player, because my knowledge of football does not really go that far into the Norwegian leagues, or the Norwegian league, should I say, to say, oh yeah, I know he's a good player or anything like that. I'm not going to say that. The only reason I knew that Hatate or Kyogo were good was because Liam Carrigan, I listened to the Celtic Down Under podcast, and he'd mentioned both of them prior to them signing, because they'd asked him on that. Jared had said to him, who would, if there was players that you could pick out from the Japanese league. By the way, he lives in Japan and watches Japanese football. Doesn't live in Govan Hill. And he said Ryo Hatate and Kyogo Furuhashi, and he also mentioned Daisen Maeda as well. So he picked 3 players out that we would go on to sign. So when they came in, I was like, right, well, a guy that I've listened to has spoken about them in glowing terms. Therefore, I know that they're going to be good. With this guy that's coming in, who knows? A huge question mark over it as to is it a legacy signing or not? And I think the last thing that we want to be doing is signing legacy players as we're about to welcome in a new manager who has a history of not wanting players that he hasn't put. It's not a very good start, is it? But maybe he's been consulted. I don't know.
You don't want to start it with Brendan Rodgers the way it ended the last time. That's just setting things off on the very wrong foot. But Liam Devine says he loves the sign. Huge sign the club's recruitment department is working well. I think many fans think the recruitment department has been working well, arguably since Ange came in. Most of the signings have been hits. To find a miss from Ange's signings, it would be very, very hard to find. But with Brendan Rodgers coming in and this war chest being given to him, I feel like there's going to be a lot of expectation, because Ange had made the progress in his 2 years at the club. So people would have thought if it was a 3-step plan, it would have been get us back to the league, win the 2 cups, and then some progress in Europe would have been the 3rd step. Ange left before he could complete that 3rd step. So now it seems like it's on Rodgers to really fulfil the sort of process. What would your expectations be for Celtic next season if Brendan Rodgers comes in, he gets all of this money? Because I feel like my expectations with Celtic have been for years. I've always said 3rd place in Champions League and a decent run in Europe, and we never do it. So would just a sign of improvement be good? Do you think we got that improvement last year, actually? Because we did compete, but ultimately we finished bottom of the group. We didn't have any European football after January.
Yeah, no, we didn't, and that it was sore to an extent, but it's ultimately been placated by the treble. We won another treble. and a world record 8th domestic treble. Let's not forget that that's happened, because it did, and I'll never forget that it's happened, because it meant a lot to me as a fan to be there at the game and then to be there at Celtic Park afterwards. But Europe has been something that I think back to like the Copenhagen game just before lockdown, and Zenit St. Petersburg and Bodo Glimt as well. These teams are not miles better than Celtic, or certainly in theory should not be miles better than Celtic. We get beaten with the stick of, oh, you've not won a knockout game in Europe since 2004, I think it is.
Yeah, I was still in nappies when we won our last knockout game. It's
scary. Yeah, thanks for that. I was not long out of university, but yeah, I know. Tell me about it. But I that would be my goal. Would be well, we can't talk about the Champions League as if we're maybe going to be in the Champions League. We are in the Champions League. There's no two ways about it. There's no qualifiers. You're so used to in your head being like, oh, if we manage to get through, we're there. It's fine.
That was one of the problems under Rodgers. We would leave the business so late as well. We would wait for the bargain bucket for all the sort of decent names to get plucked out of it. So then you're left sort of fishing around for freebies. You're used to Rollers and a free going into a European.
The beat on the centre.
Exactly.
Or Owen O'Connell, no disrespect to these guys, but I mean, come on, you cannot be hanging your hat on hoping against. It's an absolute Hail Mary to hope that you're going to manage to negotiate against, okay, not the best sides you'll ever face, but against sides that are well coached and that have been playing together and have an understanding. When you're throwing together a central midfielder alongside a rookie centre half from the youth team, it's likely going to end in tears. I mean, the AEK Athens game was horrible. That away game when they beat us in Greece was just that.
It wasn't just the game. That match inspired the signing of Vasilis Barkas, which I think it also doubles down on how terrible that was.
I'll still maintain I don't think is a terrible keeper, but we should never have shelled out $5 million for him. It was the wrong keeper at the wrong time, I think. Anyway, but the AEK Athens game was an example. So this Champions League campaign coming up, if we were to finish third and get into the Europa League and get a favourable tie, the absolute goal is to win that tie and get through to the next round and then take it from there, because we've seen recent evidence of what can happen if you surf the wave and manage to sort of not fall off the board. You can get somewhere and maybe find yourself in a final, or further than the next stage after the Champions League group stages have ended. And on that, it was so lovely to see David Moyes with his dad celebrating. Don't know if you saw that footage, but his dad's like 87 or something like that, and he's on the pitch celebrating. His son has just won a European trophy, and David Moyes was on my flight back from Seville to Glasgow. So he was in Seville, and I'm sure he obviously that wouldn't have been his first thought when he won the trophy with West Ham, but I'm sure he realises the magnitude of what winning a European trophy of any kind for any club,
especially being his first trophy as a manager, I'm pretty sure, a first major trophy at least.
Totally, and people will sort of pour cold water on the level that it was, but I mean, you saw what it meant to Mourinho when he won it. So David Moyes is up there with a manager that's won a European trophy and a Scottish manager at that. So I mean, regardless of his association with Celtic, I was just pleased to see him do that. Thought it was amazing. I didn't see the game. I was actually working, but I was really pleased for him.
All the comments have been flooding. Thanks everybody for joining us over this almost an hour. The final topic I want to cover, one comes from Gary Melrose. I've been seeing a bit of discussion about it on Twitter since he was released. Mohamed El Yunusi released on a free at 28. There was a lot of talk when Ange first came in, bring El Yunusi back. Could he be another good experience buy? I was never fully convinced by Mohamed El Yunusi and his time at Celtic. I don't know what you thought of his time at the club. Do you think he could be on a free a signing you go for?
Nah, file El Yunusi alongside Patrick Roberts, Filip Benkovic. He's just going to become one of these guys that is perennially linked with us until he can no longer put on a pair of football boots. As much as I said last week about not being a fan of going back, I think this Brendan Rodgers scenario that's been presented to us is, and I know Kev said this on other shows about not going back and it never ending well. There are examples of managers going back and it being a success. But with El Yunusi, I think and with players in general, I think it's a different scenario when players' careers are so short. And you look, the key thing in that comment was 28-year-old El Yunusi. It would not really serve us well as a football club and the way that we've been progressive in the transfer market in the last few years. It wouldn't really fill me with a lot of confidence with the recruitment department if we were going back and re-signing a guy that we had on loan a couple of years ago, who did all right. He didn't do amazing. He did all right.
He had a good maybe 3 or 4 months. Then he got injured, and then he got forced to play. Was it the cup final? Injured, clearly injured, and then from there on, it was just he wasn't really the same Mohamed El Yunusi. But we're going to wrap things up here. That's our slot over. Thank you everybody for joining us on this hour-long broadcast. Be sure to press the like button if you have enjoyed. We also have an event coming up at Powers Art and Design, 30th of June 2023. Tickets still available for a night with Gordon Strachan, a former Celtic manager who succeeded in Europe. We can't forget, got us to European knockout stages. If you did enjoy today's show, be sure to press subscribe so you don't miss any other episodes. It's been a hectic few weeks and it's only going to get busier with Brendan Rodgers coming in. Thank you everybody for watching, and from me and JP Mason, we'll see you later.
Well done, James.